Imagine this. It's late 1944. You're a young German nurse, barely out of your teens, thrust into the chaos of the collapsing Third Reich. Your world isn't one of shining hospitals and plentiful supplies. It's a world of constant scarcity, a desperate fight to save lives with next to nothing. This was the grim reality for thousands of nurses and medics on the German front lines during the final agonizing months of World War II. They were trained to heal, but their hands were tied by a regime that was running out of everything except propaganda. The shortages were staggering. Basic medical supplies we take for granted today were luxuries. Think about a simple bandage. In the German field hospitals, they were often made of crepe paper. Imagine trying to dress a shrapnel wound with something that disintegrates when wet. It was a flimsy, pathetic substitute for real cotton gauze, but that was the reality. They also used cellulose wadding, a material more suited for packing boxes than treating injuries. It was a constant, frustrating battle. And it wasn't just bandages. The ingenuity born of desperation was everywhere. Sawdust, of all things, was sometimes used as an absorbent material in makeshift wound dressings. Think about the risk of infection, the splinters, the sheer inadequacy of it. Plaster for setting broken bones was so scarce that medics would have to scavenge old, used casts, break them up, and try to rework them into something usable. Even soap was a rare commodity. Cleanliness, the most fundamental principle of medicine, became an impossible standard to maintain in a world of mud, blood, and constant shortages. Perhaps the most terrifying shortage was anesthesia. Ether and chloroform were worth more than gold. This meant that countless surgeries were performed with insufficient anesthetic, or sometimes with none at all. Soldiers, already broken by the horrors of the battlefield, had to endure amputations and other invasive procedures while fully conscious, biting down on a leather strap or a piece of wood to stifle their screams. The surgeons and nurses had to become emotionally numb, operating in a haunting silence broken only by the sounds of a saw against bone and muffled cries of pain. It was a brutal, medieval level of suffering, a side of the war rarely depicted in heroic films. The concept of single-use sterile equipment was a distant dream. Everything had to be reused over and over again. Hypodermic needles were used on patient after patient, sharpened on a stone until they were blunt and pitted, creating jagged tears in the skin and dramatically increasing the risk of infection. Surgical instruments were often inadequately sterilized, boiled in dirty water over an open fire. Bandages, if they were lucky enough to be made of cloth, were washed and reused, often still stained with the blood of a previous soldier. This recycling of supplies turned hospitals into breeding grounds for gangrene, tetanus, and sepsis. For many wounded soldiers, surviving the initial injury was only the beginning of their ordeal. The real battle was against the infections that inevitably followed. All of this stood in stark contrast to the propaganda being pumped out by the regime. Goebbels's machine painted a picture of heroic sacrifice, of soldiers gladly giving their lives for the fatherland. They spoke of a heroic death, glorifying the ultimate sacrifice. But the nurses and medics saw the truth. They saw the agonizing, unglamorous reality of death. They saw young men, boys really, dying not from a single clean shot, but slowly and painfully from infections caused by a lack of simple antibiotics or a clean bandage. They saw the terror in a soldier's eyes as the surgeon approached with a saw, knowing there wasn't enough ether to put him to sleep. This disconnect between the heroic narrative and the grim reality created a deep sense of cynicism and despair among the medical staff. Then came the end. For many of these German medical units, the war didn't conclude with a formal surrender, but with the chaotic collapse of the front. One moment they were frantically working in a makeshift clinic in a barn or a cellar. The next, American or Allied troops were at the door. Capture was often a confusing, terrifying blur. These nurses and doctors, who had been struggling for so long in a world of scarcity, suddenly found themselves as prisoners of war. And this is where they encountered a shock that was, in its own way, as profound as the horrors of the front. It was the shock of American abundance. Imagine being taken to an American field hospital after years of using paper bandages. You see endless crates of sterile cotton gauze, neatly wrapped and ready to use. You see boxes upon boxes of penicillin, a miracle drug you'd only heard whispers about. You see shiny, sharp single-use needles. You see an endless supply of ether, enough to ensure that no soldier would have to feel the surgeon's knife. For the captured German medical staff, it was like stepping into a different universe. The Americans had everything. Their jeeps were overflowing with supplies. Their soldiers had rations with chocolate and cigarettes. Their hospitals were clean, organized, and astonishingly well-equipped. They would use a whole roll of pristine gauze on a single wound, and then simply throw it away. To a German nurse who had been washing and reusing bloody rags for months, this was almost incomprehensible. It was wasteful, it was extravagant, it was magnificent. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a logistical and industrial one. The sheer material wealth of the United States was on full display. This experience had a profound psychological impact. It was the moment the bitter truth sank in. The war was not just lost, it was unwinnable from the start. How could their nation, with its sawdust and paper substitutes, ever hope to compete with a nation that had so much it could afford to be careless with it? The American medics, often unknowingly, delivered the final crushing blow to the morale of their German counterparts, not with weapons, but with a simple display of their well-stocked storerooms. It was a quiet, non-violent confrontation that revealed the true disparity between the two sides. The shock of abundance was a form of bitter medicine, a harsh dose of reality that made the scale of Germany's defeat painfully, undeniably clear. The war had been fought with ideology and grit on one side, and with an overwhelming, seemingly infinite tide of material on the other. And in the end, the tide always wins. The miracle of penicillin, America's secret weapon. Then, everything changed. The story starts not on the battlefield, but in a London laboratory with a scientist named Alexander Fleming and a bit of mold. In 1928, he discovered that a specific type of mold, Penicillium, could kill bacteria. He called the substance it produced penicillin. It was a groundbreaking discovery, but there was a huge problem. Making it was incredibly difficult. It was unstable, hard to purify, and could only be produced in tiny, almost useless amounts. For over a decade, penicillin remained little more than a laboratory curiosity. As World War II loomed, the need for a powerful weapon against infection became desperate. The British scientists who had continued Fleming's work knew they couldn't scale up production while bombs were falling on their cities. So in 1941, two of them, Howard Florey and Norman Heatley, made a secret journey across the Atlantic. They carried with them a small precious sample of the penicillium mold, smuggled in their coat pockets. Their destination, America. Their mission, to convince the United States to take on the monumental task of mass-producing this miracle drug. They arrived at a government lab in Peoria, Illinois. Why Peoria? Because it was a hub for fermentation research, thanks to the local distilling industry. The American scientists immediately recognized the potential. They began a frantic search for a better, more productive strain of the penicillium mold. The call went out and samples came in from all over the world. The breakthrough, however, came from a surprisingly mundane source, a moldy cantaloupe found at a local Peoria market. This new strain, dubbed the cantaloupe strain, produced over 200 times more penicillin than Fleming's original. It was the key that would unlock mass production. With this new strain, the American government and private industry launched an unprecedented effort. Chemical companies like Pfizer, Merck, and Squibb, which had previously been rivals, pooled their resources and knowledge. The challenge was immense. They had to invent entirely new methods of deep tank fermentation, essentially creating giant vats where the mold could grow in carefully controlled conditions. It was a race against time, a scientific and industrial gamble of epic proportions. By 1943, the efforts began to pay off. The first batches of penicillin, a yellowish powder they called the Yellow Magic, were ready. Initially, the supply was so limited that it was reserved for the most critical military cases. There are incredible stories from this time. Doctors would collect the urine of patients treated with penicillin because a significant amount of the drug was excreted, and they could actually recover and reuse it. That's how precious it was. But American industry was just getting warmed up. By D-Day in June 1944, the production had exploded. U.S. factories were churning out enough penicillin to treat every single Allied soldier wounded in the Normandy invasion. It was an industrial miracle that the Axis powers simply could not match. German intelligence knew about penicillin. They had even captured some early samples, but they believed it was impossible to produce on such a massive scale. They were completely blindsided by the sheer volume America could create. The impact on the battlefield was nothing short of revolutionary. Soldiers who would have certainly died from infections like gangrene were now surviving. A soldier with a severe infection in his leg, who just a year earlier would have faced certain amputation, was now treated with a few shots of penicillin and was back on his feet in weeks. The amputation rate for compound fractures plummeted from a near certainty to almost zero. Pneumonia, which had been a major killer in army hospitals, was now easily treatable. For the doctors and nurses on the front lines, it was like witnessing a miracle every single day. They were accustomed to a grim routine of debridement, amputation, and watching young men die from sepsis. Suddenly, they had a weapon that could stop infection in its tracks. A German doctor captured by the Allies expressed his astonishment, saying he couldn't believe they had enough of this yellow magic to use on every wounded soldier. He thought it must be reserved for high-ranking officers. The idea of such abundance was simply beyond his comprehension. This abundance was America's secret weapon. It wasn't a bomb or a tank, but it saved hundreds of thousands of lives and dramatically boosted troop morale. Soldiers knew that if they were wounded, they had a real chance of survival and recovery. It fundamentally changed the calculus of war. The Allied command could sustain offensives for longer, knowing their medical corps could handle the casualties in a way that was previously unimaginable. The story of penicillin during World War II is a testament to scientific ingenuity, international cooperation, and most of all, the sheer industrial power of the United States. It was a project on the scale of the Manhattan Project, but instead of creating a weapon of destruction, it created a tool of healing that would change medicine forever. After the war, this mass production know-how made penicillin available to the civilian world, heralding the dawn of the antibiotic age and saving countless millions of lives in the decades to come. It truly was a bitter medicine that delivered a sweet, life-saving victory, not just on the battlefield, but for all of humanity. The logistics of compassion, blood, food, and linens. Imagine being a British doctor in the war, accustomed to scarcity, to making do, to reusing every last bandage. Now picture your first encounter with an American field hospital. It wasn't just a different setup, it was a different world. This is the story of that culture shock, a shock delivered through blood, bread, and clean bed sheets. It is a story about how the sheer industrial might of a nation translated into an unprecedented level of care, and how that logistical power became a form of bitter medicine for its allies. Let's start with the most vital fluid of all, blood. In the brutal calculus of war, saving a wounded soldier often comes down to a timely blood transfusion. The British had a system, a good one, but it was localized. Blood was collected in Britain, processed, and then painstakingly shipped to the front. It was a lifeline, but a fragile one, stretched thin across dangerous seas and skies. Then, the Americans arrived. They didn't just bring blood, they brought a river of it. Plasma, harvested from donors all across the United States, was flown across the Atlantic. We're talking about a continent-wide logistical pipeline dedicated to a single purpose: saving lives. For a British surgeon who might have to triage based on limited blood supplies, seeing crates upon crates of American plasma was astounding. it wasn't just more. It was an entirely different scale of operation. It meant they could save soldiers who just days before would have been considered hopeless cases. The American approach wasn't just about having the resources. It was about deploying them with an efficiency that was both awe-inspiring and, for some, a little intimidating. It was the first sign that the rules of the game had fundamentally changed. And the shock didn't stop at the operating table. It extended to the most basic of human needs, food. A soldier marches on their stomach, but what they ate spoke volumes. The standard British ration was functional. It was designed for survival. It had things like hardtack biscuits and bully beef. It kept you alive, but nobody was writing home about the culinary experience. Then you get your hands on an American K-ration. The difference was staggering. Inside, you wouldn't just find biscuits. You'd find soft, white bread. Think about that for a second. White bread in the middle of a war zone. To the British, who were enduring strict rationing back home, where even a loaf of wholemeal bread was a carefully managed commodity, this was pure luxury. And it didn't stop there. The rations contained real chocolate, chewing gum, cigarettes, even toilet paper. It was a small package, but it sent a powerful message. It said that the American system wasn't just capable of feeding its soldiers. It was capable of providing them with comforts, with a taste of home. For a British soldier, eating that white bread wasn't just about nutrition. It was a tangible symbol of a nation so wealthy, so productive, that it could afford to give its frontline troops items that were considered luxuries for civilians back in London. It was another dose of that bitter medicine, a mix of gratitude for the sustenance and a stark realization of the vast economic gap between the Allies. Now let's move from the mess tent to the hospital ward. Here, the culture shock was perhaps at its most profound, and it can be summed up in one simple item: a bedsheet. In a British field hospital, resources were precious. A sheet once used would be washed, sterilized, and put back into circulation until it was literally falling apart. Every item was conserved with meticulous care. It was the only way to operate. Enter the American mindset. A British nurse working alongside her American counterparts would be stunned by what she saw. After a patient was treated, the American nurses would simply strip the bed, bundle up the used linen sheets, pillowcases, everything, and toss them into a pile to be discarded. Not washed, not reused, discarded. This wasn't wastefulness for the sake of it. It was a brutally efficient logistical calculation. The Americans had determined that the time, manpower, and resources required to launder linens in a combat zone were more valuable than the linens themselves. It was cheaper and faster to simply ship in a new, clean, sterile supply from the endless stream flowing from the homeland. For the British staff, who were trained to conserve everything, this disposable mentality was almost sacrilegious. It felt wrong, but it was undeniably effective. It meant a faster turnaround of beds, a more sterile environment, and less time spent on laundry, freeing up personnel for direct patient care. It was a perfect, if jarring, example of how American industrial power was weaponized, even in the act of healing. The American commitment to logistics wasn't just about supplies. It was about bringing advanced medical technology directly to the battlefield. In previous wars, a soldier with a serious internal injury or a complex fracture faced a perilous journey back from the front lines to a proper hospital. Many didn't survive the trip. The Americans tackled this problem head-on by essentially making the hospital mobile. They developed specialized surgical vans, fully equipped operating theaters on wheels that could be driven right up to the front. A soldier could be moved from a trench to a sterile surgical environment in a matter of minutes, not hours or days. And then there were the mobile X-ray units. Before this, diagnosing something like shrapnel deep inside a soldier's body was a matter of educated guesswork. Now a truck could pull up, deploy an X-ray machine, and give surgeons a precise map of the damage they needed to fix. This technology wasn't just new. It was revolutionary in its application. It was the difference between life and death. For the medics and soldiers of other allied nations, seeing these gleaming, high-tech vehicles navigating the muddy tracks of the front was like seeing something from the future. It was a clear demonstration that for the Americans, no expense was spared, and no logistical challenge was too great when it came to saving a soldier's life. So, what was the cumulative effect of all this? The blood plasma, the white bread, the disposable sheets, the high-tech mobile hospitals. It was more than just a matter of better supplies. It was a powerful psychological boost, a morale booster of the highest order. When a wounded soldier saw this massive, well-oiled machine swing into action for them, it sent an undeniable message: you matter. Your life is worth this immense effort. Seeing the sheer will to save lives, expressed through an endless supply chain, gave soldiers a profound sense of security. It told them that if they fell, they wouldn't be abandoned. The most powerful nation on earth was moving heaven and earth to get them back on their feet. For their allies, it was a complex emotion. There was immense gratitude, of course. These resources saved the lives of their countrymen too. But there was also that bitter medicine, a humbling recognition of their own nation's limitations. It was a stark reminder that while they were all fighting the same war, they were not fighting it with the same deck of cards. The American logistical machine wasn't just a tool of war. It was a display of power, a source of hope, and a shocking lesson in the awesome, overwhelming might of American abundance. Cracks in the ideology when propaganda meets reality. Instead of the brutal end you expected, you find yourself in an American field hospital. The first shock hits you. You're lying in a clean bed with crisp white sheets. American doctors and nurses are treating your wounds with the same care they give their own soldiers. They give you morphine for the pain, something that was becoming a luxury on the German front lines. This is your enemy? The supposed barbarians? This isn't what Goebbels promised. This is the first crack in the foundation of your entire worldview. As you recover, you're sent to a prisoner of war camp, maybe in the United States itself. And the shocks just keep coming. You see mountains of food. White bread, something you haven't seen in years. Coffee, real coffee, not the ersatz stuff made from acorns. Meat, butter, sugar, all in quantities that would seem like a king's feast back home. German civilians were living on meager rations, but here, the enemy's prisoners were eating better than their own families. One German soldier later wrote about his astonishment. He was given so much food that he and his fellow prisoners started feeding leftovers to the birds. He thought about his starving parents back in Hamburg and felt a profound sense of confusion and despair. The propaganda had painted a picture of an America crippled by the Great Depression, a fragile society that would shatter at the first push. The reality was a nation of overwhelming, seemingly infinite abundance. This wasn't just about food, it was everything. The quality of the American uniforms, the sturdy boots, the sheer number of trucks, jeeps, and planes. A German general, after his capture, was flown across the United States. He saw the endless factories, the sprawling cities untouched by bombs, the vast fields of grain. He saw a nation not just fighting a war, but thriving. He quietly told his aide, "We have lost the war." He hadn't seen a single battle on American soil, but he understood the simple, brutal math. Germany, for all its early victories and military prowess, was running on fumes. It was a nation cannibalizing itself and the countries it conquered to fuel its war machine. The United States, on the other hand, was just getting started. It was an industrial giant that had been awakened, and its capacity to produce was something the German leadership had fatally underestimated. Think about the psychological impact. It wasn't just about realizing you were on the losing side. It was a deeper, more personal collapse. If the leaders were so wrong about America's strength, what else were they wrong about? If the enemy wasn't the subhuman monster you were told they were, then who were you? Some German nurses were even brought in to help in American field hospitals due to staff shortages. They worked side by side with American medical personnel. They saw firsthand the care, the resources, the professionalism. One nurse recounted her experience, saying, "We were told they were barbarians, but they were kind. They treated our wounded just like their own. I started to wonder who the real barbarians were. This wasn't a battlefield conversion. It was a slow, dawning realization that the entire narrative they had been fed was a lie." For the soldiers and civilians back in Germany, this truth trickled in through letters from prisoners of war. These letters, censored of course, couldn't say everything. But they could talk about the food. They could talk about being treated humanely. And those reading between the lines back home began to understand. The stories of American weakness were a fantasy. This bitter medicine of American abundance was a powerful weapon, perhaps as powerful as any tank or bomber. It didn't just defeat armies, it defeated an ideology. It dismantled the carefully constructed reality of the Third Reich, not with bullets, but with white bread, clean hospitals, and an undeniable display of industrial power. The Führer had promised victory through will and sacrifice. He had assured his people of their inherent superiority. But you can't will factories into existence. You can't sacrifice your way to an abundance you don't possess. The German soldier, sitting in a POW camp, eating a meal he couldn't have dreamed of on the front, was living proof of that failure. The war was not just lost on the battlefields of Stalingrad and Normandy. It was also lost in the minds of those who saw the truth of American abundance and realized that their world was built on a foundation of lies. The shock wasn't just that Germany would lose. The shock was that it never, ever had a chance. This piece of history is a sobering reminder of how propaganda can shape perceptions, and how reality, no matter how harsh, eventually breaks through. It shows that sometimes, the most powerful tool against a destructive ideology isn't just force, but the undeniable truth. The legacy of mercy, post-war lessons in healing. When American forces and relief workers, including countless nurses, arrived in Germany, they brought with them a standard of care that was almost alien to the war-torn landscape. They carried not just bandages and penicillin, but a vision of what a modern, functioning society should look like. For the German people, who had been living on meager rations and making do with whatever they could find, the sight of fully stocked American medical tents and field hospitals was a profound shock. It was a stark, tangible symbol of everything they had lost. Think about it. A German doctor might have had to reuse a single needle dozens of times, while an American counterpart would discard one after a single use. Clean water, sterile equipment, and an endless supply of medicine were luxuries beyond imagination for the local population. This wasn't just about providing aid. It was a cultural collision. The Americans weren't just treating wounds. They were importing an entire system, a standard of living that felt like it belonged to another world. This contrast, this shock of abundance, was the first difficult step towards rebuilding not just bodies, but trust. The role of organizations like the American Red Cross was completely transformed by World War II. Before the war, nursing was often seen through a more traditional, domestic lens. But the sheer scale of the conflict and the unprecedented humanitarian crisis that followed propelled nurses to the forefront of international relations. They became diplomats in white uniforms, pioneers on the front lines of public health and reconstruction. These nurses weren't just following orders. They were innovators forced to adapt to unimaginable circumstances. They managed makeshift hospitals, trained local volunteers, and navigated the complex politics of a conquered nation. They had to deal with everything from outbreaks of typhus to the psychological trauma that haunted an entire generation. Their work laid the groundwork for modern disaster relief and international healthcare standards. The Red Cross, and the nursing profession as a whole, emerged from the ashes of the war stronger, more professional, and with a global mission that continues to this day. What was it actually like for the American nurses who found themselves in this situation? We have first-hand accounts, diaries, and letters that paint a vivid picture. Many were young women, some barely out of their teens, thrust into a world of chaos. They wrote about the overwhelming smell of disinfectant mixed with decay, the endless lines of weary, hungry faces, and the constant, heartbreaking decisions about who to treat first. But their memories also speak of incredible resilience. They recall the small moments of connection, sharing a piece of chocolate with a child who had never tasted it, or receiving a whispered danke from a former enemy soldier. One nurse described the surreal experience of caring for German prisoners of war, men who just weeks before had been the enemy. She wrote about looking into their eyes and seeing not a soldier, but just a sick, frightened young man, far from home. These personal accounts are powerful reminders that even in the aftermath of the most brutal conflict, humanity has a remarkable capacity for compassion. The first interactions between American medical staff and German civilians were often tense and filled with mistrust. How could they not be? But medicine became a powerful, unspoken language. When an American doctor said a German child's broken bone, or a nurse soothed a feverish patient, politics faded into the background. A dose of penicillin doesn't care about nationality. A clean bandage doesn't recognize friend or foe. These acts of basic human decency were the first seeds of reconciliation. They demonstrated, in the most practical way possible, that the goal was not perpetual punishment, but a shared future. The field hospitals and aid stations became neutral grounds where former enemies could begin to see each other as people again. This medical bridge, built on empathy and professionalism, was arguably more effective than any treaty or political declaration in beginning the long, slow process of healing the deep wounds of war. It showed that even after unimaginable conflict, a common ground could be found in the simple, universal desire to alleviate suffering. When we look back at the end of World War II, we often focus on the grand treaties and the redrawing of maps. But perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in these quieter moments of healing. The story of American medicine in post-war Germany teaches us something profound, that true strength isn't just about the power to win a war. It's about having the capacity and the will to heal what's been broken. The shock of abundance was bitter, yes. It was a humbling reminder of defeat and devastation. But it was also a promise of a different future. It showed that the greatest weapon we possess is not one that takes life, but one that saves it. The power to heal, to rebuild, and to show mercy is what ultimately allows us to move forward from the darkest chapters of our history. It's a legacy of compassion that continues to inspire humanitarian efforts around the world today, reminding us that in the end, our shared humanity is what truly matters. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as moving as we did, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history. See you next time.